This lesson is section 1.3, Distance and Midpoint. Our first objective will be to find the distance between 2 points in the coordinate plane. Objective number 2 will be finding the midpoint of a segment in the coordinate plane. First, let's talk about finding distance in the coordinate plane. Say that I gave you these two lines. How would you find the length of these two lines? Well, since these are horizontal and vertical lines, it's really easy to find the distance. All you need to do is count the number of spaces between the two endpoints. So our horizontal line has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So the length of this segment is 6. Our vertical line has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So this length is also 6. What if I give you a diagonal segment? Well, whenever you have a diagonal segment, you cannot just count the boxes between the two endpoints because we don't have clear increments going between the two. So to find the distance between these 2 points, we actually have to use a formula called the distance formula. The distance formula is distance is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Now remember, this x2 and x1 and y2 and y1 are standing for the x and y pairs of your two endpoints. So let's try using the distance formula. Find the length of a segment that has the endpoints at 0, 0 and 4, 3. So 0, 0 is going to be my x1, y1. 4, 3 is going to be my x2, y2. It's kind of like when you're using the slope formula and you have your x1, y1, x2, y2. So, first step is to plug in all of your x2, x1, y2, and y1. So our x2 was 4, our x1 was 0, our y2 was 3, our y1 was 0. Once you plug everything into the distance formula, you need to then start simplifying within the parentheses. We're using the order of operations. So now we have the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared. Now we need to move on to exponents. We square the 4 and the 3 to get 16 plus 9. Now I can do my addition underneath the square root. And I get the square root of 25, which was equal to 5. Make sure you keep the square root on every single step. That's the most common mistake that I see, is that people will leave off the square root. Do not take the square root of the number until the very last step. Let's try another example. You should try this one on your own by pausing the video. Then play the video to see if you got the correct answer. Find the distance between k, which is 5, 8. This actually falls off of my graph. And m, which is -2, -3. So step 1 is to plug in your coordinates into the distance formula. Notice when you plug your coordinates in this time, we have a minus, minus, and minus, minus. Remember, when you have two subtraction signs together, it turns into a plus sign. So 5 minus -2 is going to equal 7, because it's 5 plus 2. And 8 minus -3 will equal 11, because it's 8 plus 3. After you evaluate the parentheses, we're going to evaluate our exponents. So now we have the square root of 49 plus 121. We add together our numbers. And then finally, we take the square root. Now notice that you cannot take the square root of 170. If the number under the square root is not a perfect square, you can go ahead and just box in that answer. We're going to leave it as the square root of 170 because that's an exact answer. Alright, another example. So here we have a number line. It asks us to find AX. Remember, whenever it's just two letters without a line over the top, it's talking about the length of AX. If you have 2 points in a number line, you're simply just going to count the spaces in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The length of AX is 8. Here's an example using the distance formula. You need to pause the video and try this on your own. Here I'm going to show you the work for the distance formula, and you should get the square root of 20. This is not a perfect square, so we're just going to leave it as the square root of 20. Now let's move on to the midpoint formula. You can find the midpoint of a segment using the endpoints of that segment. So this is the midpoint formula. To find the midpoint of a segment, you're going to add together the two x values and divide by 2, comma, add together the two y values and divide by 2. Your answer should be an ordered pair because it's the point that's in the very middle of the line segment. Find the midpoint of the segment with endpoints at 2, 3, and 4, -5. Step 1 will be plugging in your values into your x1, x2, y1, and y2. Now we need to add our x's together. We add 2 plus 4 to get 6, and we still have the 2 on the bottom. Then we add our y's together to get -2, and we still have 2 on the bottom. Our final step will be to divide each of those by 2. So our midpoint is 3, -1. Remember that a midpoint will cut a line segment exactly in half. Go ahead and try this example on your own. Find the coordinates of the midpoint of x, y if x is -2, 3 and y is -8, -9. The answer is -5, -3. Next one. What is the measure of line segment AC if B is the midpoint of AC? So this one's a little bit different, and we're going to have to use some prior knowledge. We know that B is the midpoint. A midpoint is always going to cut a line segment exactly in half. So, since we do not have any coordinates, we are not going to use the midpoint formula for this. What we can do is use the betweenness of points equation, which says that AB plus BC equals AC. Now, since B is the midpoint, I know that AB and BC are going to have the same measure because B is cutting that line exactly in half. Since I know that, I'm going to plug in all the information into my betweenness of points formula. So I know AB is 2a minus 1 because it's the same as this one. I know that BC is 2a minus 1, and I know that the whole thing AC is going to be 3a plus 1. Now I just need to solve the equation by combining like terms, getting all my variables to one side and my numbers to the other side, and you find that A is equal to 3. Now, is this my answer? No. The question up here says, what is the measure of AC? In order to find that, I need to plug this 3 back in. So I'll have 3 times 3 plus 1 from up here. So my final answer is that AC is equal to 10. Notice that the first answer we got is over here, but that's not the correct answer. Make sure you always check to see that you answered the correct question. Alright, let's try something a little new now that we know the midpoint formula. Find the coordinates of the missing endpoint A if B is the midpoint of AC. So, in this case, we are not finding the midpoint, we are actually finding one of the endpoints, and we're given the midpoint right here. So, let's talk about the midpoint formula. When you add the x's together and divide by 2, and add the y's together and divide by 2, you get a midpoint, which is x comma y. Let's plug in the information that we know from the problem. I know my x2 value is -6, and I know my y2 value is -2. I also know that my midpoint is -3, -5. Now, how on earth can I solve this to find out what my missing x and y values are? Well, notice when you add your x's together and divide by 2, you get this number. So why don't we set up an equation knowing that? We know that if you do -6 plus x1 and divide by 2, it's going to give you -3. The same thing's going to happen with our y values. If I add together -2 plus y1 and divide by 2, it's going to give me -5. Now I just need to solve both of these equations, and that will give me my answer for x1 and y1. So for each equation, we need to multiply by 2 to get that 2 out of the denominator. So I have -6 plus x1 is equal to -6, and -2 plus y1 is equal to -10. Then I need to solve for x1 and y1. So our final answer is that our missing endpoint is going to be 0, -8. You can check your answer by making sure that if you were to use this endpoint and this endpoint, that you would get this as the midpoint. So if I did 0 plus -6 and divide by 2, I get -3. If I did -8 plus -2 and divided by 2, I would get -5. So I could quickly just mentally check that. I want you to try this one on your own. This is just like the example we just did. So make sure if you don't remember how to do it, you rewind the video and rewatch the example, and you'll follow the same steps for this one. The answer that you should get is 17, -11. Thank you, and see you in class.